you mentioned that the swastika symbol was used in Atlantis. Can you tell me which group in particular used it during this time?
The priest caste is particular interaction. They had something more astronomical awareness, as you might be familiar in those castes at the beginning of the Atlantic continent and the foundation, yes? That's much later on, where what we consider spacefaring civilization, so they had landed on Earth before they mixed with the Earth's population, produced certain offspring that you now considering a certain race or certain groups, also brought with them certain technology, certain knowledge of the stars, including symbolism and occult practices, which later on became part and parcel of many of your cultural knowledge, which is also why the symbol then found its way into numerous continents. It was also largely used by Upper Nile Egyptian societies at the beginning, in the Mesopotamian region, obviously also by the European settlers originally and went to the north in particularly, and now you consider the Germanic tribes, yes. Those ideas that casted somewhere, but that was obviously much, much later. Originally also certain high civilizations like the Greeks, that were infiltrated by the Federation later on, were also losing certain symbolism. Those particular Atlantean priests, you would consider them also very inferior or affiliated with either one side, not really much of a difference than at this particular point in time, as these particular groups were merely what you might consider refugees for another system after their space exploration ship had certain problems. Yes, they were also coming from a certain region that then later on made contact again with certain secret societies, which gave then a rise to the groups that formed the modern day, what you're considering Germany country in Brussels located, perhaps also incarnated for the very reason of the collaboration that this group then later decided to take on with particular members of extraterrestrial civilizations. However, originally those beings we were previously sharing were not reptilian nature affiliated with the Empire. They were coming from a region in the Taurus star system, from what we're aware of, but they had also ventured on various different planets in the Milky Way, and this particular symbol is obviously also a representation for this entire star system. Not necessarily the same way it later became popular, with particular 4 arms. Yes, there are numerous arms attached originally to the black sun, would be another manifestation of the particular idea, and various societies in your planet have similar occult symbology. The Celtic cross, for example, yes, which were all originally dating back to one and the same. And as you're familiar in your entire culture in your planet, the more they ventured off from what they got something originally, the more they developed the individual interpretation of certain occult practices, of certain symbols, which then stopped looking exactly the same after millennia of different evolutions in different parts of your Earth. But originally, yes, it was introduced from what we're familiar by this particular priest caste, which also later on mixed with society on Earth, at least as far as it didn't go extinct to the capitalism.
I see. So was the swastika very publicly visible, such as on rooftops and flags, similar to the era of Nazi Germany?
Not to that extent, no. The sign still was originally more rounded, similar to the symbol that was used by the Thule Society, which in its own endeavors and research also became more aware through their research of the Atlantean continent of our existence. But that was much later, during the idea of the Ahnenerbe, from what we're familiar with. They also picked the idea of the Thule Society, which is why they conducted research in Tibet, where they required certain documents which were also hinted by us, even though at this point they were aware of our existence, which also suggested they dig up certain regions in Africa, where they then found some of those hints. However, the swastika was originally used more in the rounded shape, not in the crooked cross, Haken, Kreuz idea, and it became more popular during the Third Reich in the Brussels region. And besides that, when it was not used that inflationary. It's not such an idea like it was the national symbol it was put in every building. It was something more reserved for occult groups, but everybody on Earth at this particular point in time that knew about Atlantis or knew that this symbol was somewhat affiliated with the culture, but not necessarily with rich. It was not necessarily political symbol. It became much later on this idea. Also, when it became more than a political symbol again, it was starting to be used by numerous secret societies on your world long before the so-called Nazi party picked it up as its symbol. They simply chose the symbol because it was being used by much older societies that existed much earlier on, that started to dig up Atlantean scriptures centuries earlier.
Right, I got you. Now, you had said before that Atlanta was nuked, but roughly how many cities in Atlantis were nuked in total?
At least 5 larger ones. But we are talking about larger nuclear attacks. There were also obviously bombings or more primitive nuclear attempts in smaller regions. Now, there were also other weaponry employed between those factions. You might not consider them nukes, but they were still weapons of mass destruction. What we are having is simply a map we are trying to project of where the bombings hit. But remember, we are also that directly affiliated with the Atlantic society in terms of us walking around the citizens at the time when it went underwater, so we were also having intel from outer space, so to speak.
Right, so who exactly nuked them? Was it the Federation or the Empire or some unaffiliated group?
One larger impact also came from a meteor that pulled into a certain technology, which ultimately caused a shockwave. And yes, there were numerous groups involved in this whole endeavor. We believe the RFA is also the conflict among each other, mainly about the genetic programming going on. As we mentioned previously, in direct because not everybody was happy about genetic manipulation in their own ranks. And again, we're mainly talking here about a group that later on mixed with people on Earth entirely, at least those didn't go extinct, except those that ventured off on our world again, that you would consider the Nutions today, for example. Even though some of they were rich race, you might feel familiar, Venus also got its own share of catastrophes, which is why its main surface area is uninhabitable, at least in your current dimension. So, those particular groups had conflict with each other, and we would consider them airy-fairy, but they affiliate with themselves with Federation not immediately. They did this later on, or otherwise their whole idea of genetic manipulation might not have been happening the same way originally anyway. However, your so-called Anunnaki group might also be considered responsible for this whole endeavor in the first place, but again, it's a very general term that has been used by members of your so-called scientific and sometimes pseudo-scientific or research communities. Those was a crew of larger, mostly mammalian beings, yes? And partly also reptilian, yes. Those groupings that people Europe simply dropped their Anunnaki also had conflict among each other. Because it was not one entire endeavor, they also had conflict about what's supposed to happen to people on Earth. Remember, many beings out here don't use money. It's very rare. So while your conflicts on Earth are very often about who gets how much money, usually when times we're looking at your planet from outside or other planets for that matter, we're considering two things: genetics and real estate. While the Federation has traditionally been more interested in the beings that live on the surface, we've been more interested in real estate. Everybody has been interested in genetics. So this particular point in time is the great conflict about how to genetically interfere or not interfere with beings on your planet, which largely was started as the conflict in the first place between members of what you considering harass monkey individuals. We are not entirely sure if they would be considered fair federations at this point, because they allied themselves or became members later in what you consider your timing, not at the particular point when they discovered your planet, so to speak. At this point, they were largely unaffiliated from what we're aware of. However, genetic manipulation obviously took place before them, including by us, installing your brain, etc., including by certain Illuminati groupings, Anunnaki groupings, millions of years ago, and the ending of what you consider the dinosaur era, and the whole endeavor, and we previously talked already about the idea of the conflict that your scientists call so euphemistically the extinction event of the dinosaurs, which we previously shared already. We don't necessarily to go off on tangents here again, as we are familiar in multiple story in the West, we are sending too much emotionally charged energy through it. In our opinion, obviously, was genocide, which again is also tied into the whole conflict you later experience as a species, because if you build on a shaky foundation, you're obviously getting what you say karmic conflict. But there are things we are mentioned off on tangents here already from your original question. Does this answer what you were aiming for, or do you wish now on timing or not? If you wish, you can put some more detailed queries in this particular topic. It's also a heartfelt one for us.
Yeah, that answers it sufficiently for now. I would like to explore it more later, but I think I'll pause now with my questioning. When the Anunnaki dropped the 5 large nukes on Atlantis, was it similar to how the United States dropped one on Hiroshima and demanded Japan surrender, then waited a few days and dropped another on Nagasaki after Japan refused, and planned to drop another on Tokyo if they didn't surrender? Like, what I mean is, like, did the Anunnaki wait a few days between each bombing and warn the leadership of Atlantis to give in to their demands, which they refused to do? Or did they just drop all 5 bombs at once?
There was much threatening back and forth much longer before that. There was some time frame between the nukes and their idea of tuning in the meteor, yes?
Okay.
So there was nuking before the entire island was detonated, so to speak. But to a large degree, there were also different factions. Some wanted war and others did not. So when you're talking about the Anunnaki, it's a very general, broad term. Again, from your word, it's been term that's been used for many different civilizations, right? The group that had conflict there was mostly those who were the ancestors of today's Northern Europeans, yes?
Right.
And then the conflict among each other and with those that were settling on those islands, yes? Like the Bluish peoples, for example, were further to the south, and the whitish people were further to the north. There was a quarrel how to interlink with those that were already offspring of earlier genetic manipulation. And there was difference in opinion among the visitors themselves.
So were the 5 nukes dropped all at the same time, like on the same day, or did several days pass in between?
More or less, several days likely. We don't have the exact details, not like we were present on the island at the time. We were at other times. However, there are nukings happening, not just what you consider a nuclear bomb today. Other weapons of mass destruction that you might not be even familiar with were also employed.
Okay. Were there any kinds of
anti-matter bombing, perhaps?
Oh, wow. So what happens when an antimatter bomb goes off?
It simply disintegrates everything in the vicinity, yes?
Okay.
Antimatter literally is like something that's allergic to matter. Like your nuclear bomb is much more sophisticated in terms of how it needs to be set up. Antimatter is very simple to work with, or very difficult, depends if you know the trick or not. As long as it's in vacuum, there's nothing to it. But as soon as there's anything it gets in touch with, there's a massive explosion. Right?
Cool. Okay, interesting.
Certainly, as long as you're standing far away. If you're very close, it's rather very odd.
Right. So were there any kinds of battles in Atlanta or any other city before they were nukes, such as spaceships fighting each other in the sky, or gun battles in the streets, or anything like that?
Not necessarily gun battles, but yes, obviously different groups that were caught and punished. Obviously, it was this whole endeavor of the quarrel about the genetic manipulation going on, mostly between the natives and the settlers, so to speak. And then there was the quarrel where, from what we're aware, the people that landed attacked first, yes? They destroyed the ship. They even went so far as to fire weapons of mass destruction on another planet, like they also that was connected with the structure of Malden was much earlier, and then lots of time passed in between before it became somewhat necessary for them to retaliate. Remember, those that landed there had been on Mars and Malden before that.
Right.
So it's been a long ongoing conflict and went cold for a long time before it became hot again.
Right. You said that the visitors destroyed a ship. What did you mean by that? Like, where was the ship and whose ship was it?
Again, same race from what we were aware, located locked in Earth's orbit at the time. There was also shuttle service going on between different colonies at the time, Mars, Venus, Malden, and Earth.
Okay. I got you.
To some degree, yes.
Can you tell me what was at the exact center of the Acropolis in Atlanta? Like, was it really some kind of giant energy crystal like some people believe?
There was also an oracle located there that was feeding off the energy of what you might consider a crystal monument, if you wish, yes, or a crystal city even. It was a power center, yes.
Where was this crystal city located? Was that in the Acropolis?
Yes. It was a pyramid.
Oh, the
we
pyramid.
mentioned this previously, yes.
Cool. So like the temple to Poseidon and like the obelisk and everything else in the Acropolis, was that all made of crystals?
To a large part, yes. Like caps, for example.
Right, okay. So the whole pyramid, though, was crystal?
The cap and certain other parts of it. Same as the obelisks. Large part of the obelisk was made of crystal. You have something today, it's called orgonite, correct?
I think Plato might have mentioned that when he was talking about Atlanta. What was the word again?
Orgonite.
I'm not too familiar with that term.
A substance that's constructed of various minerals, crystals, etc. It's not exactly what they were made of, but it's a term of reference for those that are aware of what it is.
Okay, yeah,
I'm much more sophisticated than that, but the principle.
Right. Yeah, I'm not too familiar with it, but I'll look into.
We doubt that Plato was. There was a lot lost in translation from Saul.
From who?
The Egyptian priest.
Thoth?
That was a later name.
Okay. All right, so I may have misunderstood you. Like, did you say that there was an actual big crystal at the exact center of the Acropolis?
Yes, in front of the pyramid. Which the consisted of it, yes.
So the pyramid was at the exact center?
Pretty much, yes. Not like geographically measured, but it was the main important thing in the center, yes.
Okay, what color was the pyramid?
Pinkish. Perhaps similar to your rose quartz, but much more shiny.
Okay, and now, do you know if the people Richard Byrd met near the North Pole in 1947 with the crystals?
It approximately the same size of the one in Paris in the Louvre.
Okay, so one as big as the ones in Egypt, then?
Not quite. Well,
I got you.
There were some Atlantis that were very bigger than that, but we're talking about a specific one now. Don't go ahead.
Yeah, so like about the people that Richard Byrd met near the North Pole in 1947, I mean, like they had a crystal city similar to what you just described, and they had a type of swastika on their flying saucers. Were they connected to Atlantis at all?
Obviously, yes. A lot of the peoples that went underground when Atlantis sank, yes, are descendants of both Atlantean and Lemurian cultures, but they have also been underground before that. They just colonized parts of the surface also, yes.
Uh-huh.
when they were landing on Earth from other worlds. Some of them went underground, some of them decided to go to the surface. Their own narrative might also be different than what we're aware of, but from what we're aware of, they are not the natives of planet Earth, even though they are claiming to be now. At least those particular groups that you just mentioned, there are obviously many different races on the ground, and some of them might have more DNA of natives than others, but from what we're aware of, the original natives of planet Earth have gone extinct.
Right.
And we're referring to Earth's monkeys here, not our settlements that were tried to be annihilated but were not. Some of them survived and went underground, some of them were left there underground, even though your species managed to murder most of them. But your Earth's monkeys creatures that were evolving on Earth did not survive long either, due to genetic mutation manipulation from extraterrestrial visitors, of which some of them also went underground, particularly the Nordic type race, which later was also they made contact with the people from the Western region, but also picked up the use of the swastika idea, or modified it more into the crooked cross. But we mentioned them previously in the public interaction, as perhaps you're aware of.
Yeah. So, like, the Nordic men that Richard Byrd met, were they like descendants of the priestly caste in Atlantis?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Well, I guess that answers my question.
Oversimplification, but yes.
Right.